This is Bryce Burge, host of Your Soccer Passport. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Jessica Hammer, co-host of Crowned and Dangerous here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Crowned and Dangerous, where Maddie and I talk about all things pageant related, especially our experiences in the Miss America organization. A new show comes out bi-weekly, every other Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Crowned and Dangerous. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. Find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. Daniel is spelled somehow. I can't remember myself, but again, you can find more about me at danielpoppy.com. This episode of How to Write Good and How to Write Good in general is brought to you by Public House Media. You can check them out on Facebook, Public House, as in a pub, media, or you can check out their website at thephmedia.com. So that is thephmedia.com. We are going to jump into our word of the week, and the word of the week this week is karaoke. I've just been thinking about how many words come from other languages in English. And I didn't realize karaoke was from Japan. So that's a really interesting thing. And karaoke has a very interesting and a very fitting meaning in Japanese. That meaning is empty orchestra. So I'm a big fan of when you run into a word with an original meaning that pretty much sums up what it is, but it sums it up in a very creative way, or in a way that is just novel. I really enjoy that. Of course, people are drawn to novel situations and novel things, novel anything really. They're just built to interact with those things. They're built to like them a lot. But I really, for the most part, some people have anxiety when they are drawn to specific novel things, but I especially enjoy things that are novel. And that's just an interesting way to think about karaoke. I've never done karaoke, but now you know. Now you know it's Japanese. Karaoke is a big thing, I think, in China. They go out with their friends and I think it's China. I'm almost certain it's China. I don't think it's Japan. What happens is you get with your friends. And the reason why I think it's China, because I had a friend who was in China for like a year, 2 years. He was in China for 2 years. You get with your friends, you go somewhere, you get a closed room, and you sing karaoke with your friends in this private room. So you have like a private karaoke party they do in China. It's a big thing. We're going to jump into our accidental essence. And the accidental essence for this week, I'm just going to be talking about how mundane writing is. I can't speak to other creative jobs, but I want to just talk about how I want to bring writing down to the level of just ordinary people, ordinariness, because the people who are writing aren't extraordinary people, right? We always look back in history, and I guess this maybe is reflected in me. Maybe I'm thinking about this, because I'm in a class for Shakespeare, and with Shakespeare, a lot of people think, oh, he was extraordinary, he was unbelievable, he was essentially a god. And I'm not going to say I'm better at Shakespeare than writing. But at the same time, I'm not going to say Shakespeare is a god. I'm not going to say there's a lot of normal stuff going on there. So I'm going to be talking about creativity. I want to talk about how creativity is. I really do think it's a skill that you can learn. I think every person is to a certain degree creative, because the less creative you are, the less you're able to function, right? So for example, what chimpanzees do, and this is, I guess it's kind of an act of creativity. They're making something. They're using something in a unique way. They, in certain areas where chimpanzees live, they take a stick and they strip off all the bark, and then they go fishing in termite mounds, and then the termites climb up the stick, and they're using a tool. So humans aren't the only things that use tools. Actually, I believe crows will use things as tools as well. And that is... They're using something in a unique way that it wasn't meant to be used that way before, and that's what creativity is. So even if you think you're totally uncreative, if you were in a situation where you're like, well, I don't have it, I can't let's just say your car broke down and you absolutely needed to get somewhere. You could probably figure it out, even if you don't consider yourself very creative. So there is a certain level of creativity in each person. The only people who wouldn't be creative are people who are even unconscious people are creative in some ways. If you're dreaming and you're having all these connections going together, maybe some people who are brain dead, which that's a different story because they're not thinking at all. So I just want to quick explain. So I want to quick explain my experience and what I do pretty much every single day. I want to explain what I do pretty much every single day in terms of creating something. And my creativity is limited to, well, it's not limited to writing, but the most creativity I do is with the head of Public House Media. And he was just asking me how everything was going. And I was just saying, oh yeah, like what you can do is if you ever want to write a book, what you can do is you write 15 minutes a day. And by the end of the year, you'll have plenty of material to use to publish that book. Now, if you write 15 minutes a day, you're not going to be writing that much every single day, right? So I bet that if you wrote 15 minutes a day, you would write, I actually have to do this math because I can't do it in my head. If you wrote 15 minutes a day, you would be writing about 250 words. That's not very high at all. So in 1 hour, you would be writing, well, maybe not 250. Yeah, maybe about 250. You probably type faster than me. I'm not a very fast typer. You write about 250 words, maybe 200 words, but we're getting around 800 to 1,000 words a day. Now, there's 365 days in a year. Now, if you just take 15 minutes a day to write every single day, you've got 365,000 words. Now, if you're writing something super long, if you want to write book 6 of the Harry Potter series, that's probably not 365,000 words. I bet you that book is around, it's maybe 200,000 at the most. It's a big book, but I don't know exactly how many words, but it's probably around 200,000. So you're above that level, and there's other books that are enormous. I know there's fiction that is enormous. It's like you get the book and it's just like, oh my gosh, my brother is like, oh, here, read Atlas Shrugged. He gave me the book. It has it has 900 pages. Now that maybe has over 365,000 words. But typically when you're writing a book, if you're writing something that is just meant for a genre such as romance or even or even mystery or something like that, if you're outside of the science fiction realm, you're going to be writing something about 50,000 to 75,000 words, maybe more depending on who you are. But if you're in science fiction, you'll write around 100,000 words, maybe a little more. Depends on what you want to write and how long it's going to write. Fantasy fiction is also in that. So if you write 15 minutes a day, let's just say you even write, well, let's just say you can't even write 250 words in 15 minutes. Maybe you write less, and maybe you can only write 250,000 words in a year. Now, you do not need the time it takes. You don't need to. Most books are not 250,000 words. You're probably never going to be able to go as a new author to an agent and say, hey, read my work. I want to get it published. They're probably going to say, this person has never written anything else before. This is the first thing. Now, even if maybe your book is phenomenal, that might get you going. But at the same time, they look for books that are marketable. And part of the marketability is people wanting to read what you write. And if people have never read anything you've written before, you don't have as much clout, and therefore they can't market your 250,000 word book because it's huge. Like if you get my book, if you have a copy of it, it's a pretty big book. It's about 300 pages. I don't have it in front of me. I think it's around 300 pages. It's only 90,000 words. Now, it's a fairly big book right there. It's almost 100,000 words. But if I doubled that, it'd be monstrous, right? So people need to see what you're working on first. But I'm digressing completely. The point of it is to say is that you can put 15 minutes a day towards your writing, and you can probably if you only put 15 minutes a day towards your writing, you'd probably have a first draft done in 6 months. Now, write every single day 15 minutes. And then in the next 6 months, you could do revisions, 15 minutes at a time. And then you'd be done. And you could publish it yourself, or you could go through the regular publishing process. Okay? Now, you can certainly do it faster. I think I want to do a book in a month. I want to have it turned over in a month, but we'll see where that goes. when the month approaches. When November approaches, I will be making announcements whether or not I'm doing that. I don't want to promise something I can't deliver on, because I don't like doing that. I've done that in the past. It's just a matter. Life is unexpected. Things happen. I want to try to actually, if I'm going to deliver on it, I want to be able to do it. Or if I promise that I want to be able to do it. So my process is sit down. I write every single day. I take some time every single morning, and one of the first things I do is I write. Now, for me, the reason I write in the morning is because first off, it is no secret that I worry about stuff a lot. So what happens is when I wake up in the morning, I'm fresh, right? I wake up in the morning, I'm generally not thinking about stuff as much. My brain hasn't started up, and all the things that worry me haven't gotten into my head yet. So what I do is if I sit down right away, I have eliminated the distractions. I actually used to wake up, I was writing this past winter, and I used to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning because that helped me not have to think about everything else, because there was nothing I needed to worry about but what I was working on. Now, what I do is I write every single day, and I write the same amount every single day. I enjoy writing longhand, right? I think for me, writing longhand is always better. I always have a better product. I always am so much more relaxed. I'm not stuck in front of a computer with a blinking line. But it's your choice what you want to write. But I think it's really important to have a goal every single day, whether that's a word count or a page count if you're just writing longhand. Now, if you write one page every single day for 365 days, that's 365 pages, right? That's a lot, which is filling up 3 or 4 notebooks, like composition notebooks like I do. So that's what I do. And I write enough that I expect to have a book done in at the most 2 to 3 months. Okay. Now you might be thinking, oh, like you have so many ideas. If you've read my stuff and you actually you might be like, oh, you have so many ideas and you're good at writing and it seems to just flow really naturally. I wrote a draft of a book that's not related to the book I've written right now. I wrote a draft. I finished it in about 2 months. It took longer than I expected. But how I did it is I had a word count, and I tried to reach that word count every single day. I don't write on Sundays unless I feel like it's relaxing. But I typically don't write on Sundays. I sometimes write on Saturdays. It's not always the case. But when I wrote the book, the draft I have now is nowhere near. It's nowhere near complete. Like if you read it, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is a mess. Now it has a lot of material, but it is a mess. I expect to go through it, and I expect to essentially I expect to change pretty much everything in the book. Now the basis of what I'm doing in each scene is going to be the same, but what I'm changing in the book is going to be completely different. Like it's going to feel a lot different than what's written. Okay, so the skeleton's the same, the flesh is different. Instead of making an elephant, I'm making a woolly mammoth or something like that. But I don't know. There's this thought. There's this thought, and it's portrayed in art. It's portrayed in movies a lot, and I don't know why, and I don't know who's writing this, and I don't really like it. It's not very accurate. I mean, if you're using it as a part of the plot, and you're using it in a good way, because I feel like it's not used in a good way, and it's usually just a trope. So there's this idea of the genius. There's this idea of the genius in movies, in TV shows, typically, and I don't know why they do this. I just think they're lazy. I think I think they probably have a lot of people who are writing one show, and they throw out a lot of ideas, and it's kind of lowest common denominator because people are trying to agree and they're trying to figure out what's going on. But there's this idea of the genius where things just pop into their mind, right? And everybody has, to a certain degree, everybody has this function in their brain where ideas come into their heads, because if you didn't have this function in your brains where ideas came into your heads, you would never get into another thought. There would never be another thought in your head. It would just stop, and then you'd be done. So the way things come into your head may be different than somebody else's, which I think is cool, which I think is good, which I think if you're going to write and you're going to practice writing, you're going to get good at writing, you're trying to base it off of your thought pattern. You're trying to base it off of your background. You're trying to base your writing off of how you talk. and bring out that natural speech. Most people can talk fairly well. Most people do not have a hard time talking. Some people have stutters. That doesn't really affect how you think. But most people generally can talk. And there's a lot of people I know who can talk, and they don't sound bad when they talk. That's the weird thing. That's the weird thing about writing. Now, you can have someone who can talk just fine. They can go through ideas. They can explain stuff to you. And they're very competent when it comes to making their tongue move and making sound come out of their tongue and getting ideas across to you. And they may even be very they may even talk in a way that you're like, oh, I really like how they talk, even though it's really different. So for example, if I met somebody from the country and they didn't have perfect English, if they didn't have good grammar when they spoke, maybe they have a weird accent or different things like that, but they talk about things, or they talk to you in a specific way, it may be like, oh, I really like how they talk. Now, if you're trying to mimic that, it's going to be hard, but they might not have a hard time mimicking it at all. It might be actually a benefit to them to take what they're doing and try to take their speech out of their mouth and put it on the paper as well as they can. Actually, what authors try to do with their characters is they try to figure out how that character talks. And if you can figure out how that character talks, you can figure out how the character thinks. And if you can figure out how the character thinks, you can write the character better. So I feel like I'm just going on into bunny trails over and over again. But there is a point to this. No matter who you are, you speak in a certain way. Most people, almost every single person I've known, when I talk to them, their speech is not awful. It flows, right? Their speech generally flows. The majority of people, their speech generally flows. There's once in a while people who it doesn't flow, but at the same time, if you took what they're saying and you put it into writing and you reflected them in writing, it'd be good writing, right? If you could reflect them in writing, you could reflect their speech in writing. So this kind of goes back to last week. You can look back on however many people you want to for writing, but at the same time, you've got to develop it through what you're saying. Okay? There's this idea in literature, maybe it's not as much in literature, but especially in movies, where there's these geniuses and all these ideas come to them and they never have to work and they never have to put forth effort or anything like that. And I think it's a dumb trope. I think it's kind of a lazy trope. I think it pictures people who are successful in ways that make people jealous of them, because there are I don't know anyone like this. I've never met anyone like this, but there are certainly people who I've never met anyone like this personally. You could probably think of somebody who's like famous, but you don't really know their background. You don't really know their whole entire lives. You don't really know what goes into it. So you're making assumptions based on what the outward appearance is, and you really don't know everything else after that. I don't know anybody personally who hasn't had to work to get where they are. Like they haven't had to go through years of stuff. My wife and I know a couple, and one of them's a doctor, and she had to go to school forever, and it's still tons and tons and tons of work, 24-hour shifts. But at the same time, in a few years, it's going to be a different story. Like in 5-10 years, she's probably going to be really, really glad that she did that. And what we think is that these people who are really at a really, really high level, now they may be really, really intelligent people, but we think they've never even put effort toward what they did. It just all came naturally. They've never tried really hard. They've never worked really hard. They've never gotten up in the morning, and they've never just gotten down, and they've never just been like, oh, I'm going to write. Now, one thing that is good advice for writers or someone who's starting to write is just to write. It's just to write every single day, because you get into the groove of writing, you get into the habit of writing. Now, I've been writing so long, I've been writing so much, it's been a hobby so much that me getting into writing, me sitting down and writing is a lot different. And I've got a lot of preconceived notions that I've given up. Now, it used to be the case that I thought that I needed to write perfect sentences when I first sat down and write. I also thought, oh, I should read through my stuff. I should read through it to make sure it's good before I move on. I've actually abandoned that. I don't read through my material after I've written it once. I say, well, if there's any issues, I can fix it when I edit it. But what I do is I write, and when I start, honestly, if I was writing and I sit down in the morning and I have a specific amount I do every day. If I sit down, I'm like, well, I got to write. What I think is, well, how am I going to start this? And if there's no inspiration popping into my head, what I usually start my first sentence with is there, which is the most generic, boring word pretty much in the English language. It's THERE. It's just a placeholder. There was a person who did this. Or maybe I start with a character's name and I explain what the premise, this character did this, right? I could do that, or I could be really, really cliche. I let myself be really cliche. I let myself be really boring, and then I just get into writing and I get it done and I go through it. That's what I do. So, for example, I'm like, it was cold outside. The wind was blowing hard. They were cold. They needed clothes. Something like that. And I've written so much that I can kind of figure it out, and I can start with stuff that works even if I'm not feeling it. Does that make sense? So I think it's especially in younger writers, maybe people who are less experienced, they start writing and they think about how they have to write really, really well, which you really don't. You don't really need to write that well to get a book published. You have to be competent. You have to be able to express your ideas. The most important thing I've found out is you have to be able to have people understand you. For example, I am very much enjoying Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. Robert Jordan is, if you were to rate him for writing, he's competent, right? He can convey his ideas, but what the literature teacher, what the writing teacher expects is not Robert Jordan. The writing teacher doesn't want Robert Jordan because he does use a lot of cliches. He does use a lot of adverbs and adjectives to explain what he's doing, and he has these sentences he strings together that they work, they convey the idea, but they aren't beautiful. For example, it's just utilitarian, and I think the guy was an engineer, so it makes sense that he wrote like that. But I like his books. I'm enjoying the books that I'm reading of his because he's telling a story. Getting back to what we were talking about. So what you need to do, if this is probably the only advice, well, I'll give more advice, but this is some of the only practical advice that I think you should do. What you should do if you're like, I'm not a good writer and I want to be a good writer. Well, sit down, write 15 minutes a day. That's all. 15 minutes a day turns into a few hours a weekish, which is 50 hours a week. Now, you're not going to be the best writer in the world, but at least you're going to learn something if you're only doing 15 minutes a day. If you can do more, do more. It doesn't matter how you do it. All you're trying to do is you're trying to make it sound the best it can. It depends on what you're writing for, but you're trying to make it sound the best you can. Also, you're trying to get your point across. Now, some people, I think I may take writing for granted, maybe because I've been writing so long, maybe it comes more naturally to me. But I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you're more interested in creative things. You're more interested in writing. Maybe you're just a bad writer. You're trying to get good, which I hope that advice helps. You should probably start reading a lot if you're a bad writer because you can see how the language works. And then you can base off your initial writing. You can base your initial writing off of other people's writing, and then you can develop from there. But there isn't anything special about a writer. I think, or maybe if there is something special about someone who writes, it's that they just take time every single day to do it and get it done. So if you're someone who's like, I have a book idea, I want to write a book, I would suggest making it a routine. That's really the really interesting thing about it. And I had a professor for a creative writing class who said this. He said that when he was in a creative writing class, his professor made them write every single day. And what it did is it created this habit of writing in him that he would just be able to sit down, he would start writing, and it would just continue to flow out of him because his brain was ready to write every single day. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to just make a time, or maybe it's part of your schedule. Maybe like it's just like at this time during the day, maybe at lunch, instead of watching something or going on your phone, you just write. Maybe you write for half an hour. You have an hour-long lunch, you write for half an hour. You still get time to relax. And what that does is it kind of primes your brain. Now, so I think I've talked about this before, but this is how I think this is how memory works. Don't quote me on that, but this is kind of how the brain works. So the brain is kind of like a forest, right? And if you're doing one specific thing, it's like walking through a forest, okay? Now, if you do that thing day after day, you're walking through the forest, but you're walking the same exact route. What happens after you walk that same exact route 1,000 times? Eventually, you're going to have a path, right? And that's what happens in the brain. Eventually, there's these pathways that get created in your brain, and it becomes easier and easier and easier. So when you write at the same time, when you create a habit out of writing, what happens is you get to that point, you're like, you sit down, And it's a lot easier to write. It's a lot easier to be more creative. So that's what I suggest. It's not that they have these. There are certainly people, Stephen King, at some points in their career. He doesn't do this anymore. I don't think. I'm pretty certain he doesn't. But I can't remember what he took. I think it was cocaine. I believe he was addicted to cocaine. And there's at least one book I've heard, allegedly, that he doesn't remember writing. Now, if you want to do that, you certainly can. You can get Adderall, you can get stuff like that. It's going to be really, really bad for you, and it's not going to work out in the long run. Which I'm just going to tell you that it's not going to work out in the long run. You're probably going to die. But you could do that. You could write a book in a week because you're just awake, or you could just take meth. And you could write a book in a week because you're awake and you have all this energy, and it's just your brain flies. But it's not going to work out for you because you're probably going to get addicted, and it's really damaging on you and your body and your relationships. It's going to destroy your life because that's what they do. That's what drugs do. That's what addictions do. They destroy your life. So that's one option, and that would be along the lines of the genius, like the person who these ideas pop into their head. It's like Sherlock Holmes. He can just see things that other people can't. And then there's the more normal, and this is pretty much everybody else. And there's like 0.0001% or less of people who things just pop into your head and they can remember stuff. And maybe you have that autistic savant who can see the city skyline once so they can draw it from memory. Everybody else just works hard. Everybody else is just like, well, if I want to write a book, I can write this many pages a day, or I can write 2 pages a day. And after this amount of time, I'll have a draft done, and after this amount of time I can do my editing, and then at the end of the year I can get my book done. It's a little bit at a time, and honestly, if you want to write 20 pages a day, you're maybe you need to take like 50, maybe you can drink about 3 pots of coffee and do it, but most of the time you're probably not going to be able to do it because you're where you're getting all your creativity, the energy you're using, right? Anything you're doing during the day is taking energy away from your brain. Like, it's taking energy away from you to function, right? You're slowly going downhill. At the end of every day, you have to go to bed so you can get recharged. You can do the same thing again. If you want to write 20 pages a day because you're just flying through it, then you can. But it's not the best habit. You're like, oh, I feel so inspired today. I'm going to write. So you write and write and write. You spend your whole entire day writing. You write 10 hours. I'm going to get further than you. I'm going to get further than you if I write 2 pages a day and just keep it consistent. The reason why I'm going to get further than you is because I'm developing a habit that is able to be maintained. Writing is not a sprint. Writing is a marathon. And if you think it's a sprint, you're going to burn out. Maybe you can write really, really quickly. Maybe you're someone who works that way and you go and stuff, but I think I'm going to surpass you because those days that you don't feel like it, I'm going to be writing. Those days that you don't feel like it, I'm going to be writing. Those days that you want to have fun, I'm going to be writing. Now, I'm not going to be writing as much as you do in one sitting, but I'm going to be writing every single time. Writing is like a marathon also because it's pretty much all mental. Writing is pretty much all mental. People see a book, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this. And yes, I'm pretty sure you can. The only reason you can't do it is because you don't think you can. Because if you break it down into small pieces, if you plan stuff out beforehand, take some time, plan it out, and you break it down into small pieces and you say, I do this much and I get done at this time, then you're going to get through it. I'm almost completely certain. Now, if you say, and it's the same thing with a marathon. You can train for a marathon, but at a certain point, because my brother's run a couple of marathons, I've never done it. But what he says, it's a mental exercise in a way. Well, it's physical. You do have to train for it so your body doesn't get destroyed in your whatever. But I mean, it's in a way a mental exercise because you're on mile 13. You're saying, oh, I'm only halfway done, right? You got to get to the end. You got to go more and more miles. And your body, if you can run 13 miles, your lungs are used to running those 13 miles, right? It's not like you're sprinting, right? That's the same thing. Like if you're writing and you feel exhausted from the writing, maybe you need to just practice, you need to relax, you need to practice, or maybe you just need to develop the habit, right? That's why I think it's very mundane. That's why I think it's something that people think is this extraordinary thing, but it's really just a little piece at a time. It's really just, I'm writing specific words. I'm trying to get a specific idea across. I don't know. Maybe you're like, hey, I don't care how long it takes to write. Maybe you can write a paragraph at a time. I don't know what I think about that from a writing level. I don't know what I think how your book is going to turn out. That may change how you write over time. It might be an interesting practice though. But yeah, so that's what I've got for you today. I hope it's helpful. I just hope it, I really, one of the reasons I think I'm doing this podcast is because I've said this before. I've probably said it 10 times already. There's so many people who think of themselves as these great intellectuals who write. And then they're like, well, you haven't made it as a writer. Like you've never been published. You've never been this. And they just place themselves above other people, or maybe they don't place themselves above other people in their mind, but how they present themselves gives that impression. And, I don't know, like, I hope that it helps you see that it's not about these great bouts of inspiration. It's about just getting down and doing the thing, which I'm pretty sure is pretty much everything you want to accomplish. It's just getting down and doing the thing every single day. And one of the most important things is doing it every single day, or pretty much every single day. I don't generally do it on weekends. I take a break, refresh, stuff like that, but I do it every single day of the week. And if you don't have time, maybe do it on your lunch break, like I was saying before. You don't have to have tons and tons of time to do it. You just have to do it. So our logical fallacy of the week is the survivorship fallacy. I may have used this when I was doing stuff, and I may have to correct myself. So the survivorship fallacy is is looking at only the people who made it and basing your conclusions on that group that made it. So for example, I'm going to take something, I'm going to point at myself. So I think in the past I said, okay, like if I talk about being successful fairly often, but I was talking about, if you want to start a business or something like that, it's like 1 out of every 10 business makes it. So why don't you just make 10 businesses? First of all, you could say that I'm engaging in the gambler's fallacy, because just because you do it again doesn't mean it's going to change the results. It's not going to change your chance of getting it. It's still going to be 1 in 10, which I think isn't actually true in that case, because you're probably getting better at business as you get along, and you try things again and again, and you're probably honing your skills. So I don't know. I think your chances do go up. But this could be the case where you're looking at people who make it, and you say, well, these people worked really hard, and these people did this and this and this, and they made it. So if we work really hard, we do this, this, and this, then we're going to make it as well. Which 1 out of 10 businesses fail, and the question is, why do they fail? Maybe everybody worked really hard. Maybe there is a certain amount of chance to being successful. So I'm going to point that out myself. If you are, like I always said, it's not good to engage in fallacies. It's bad thinking. It's my hope that people can think better. They can learn to think better through just knowing what these are and knowing that they're there. So I'm going to go. You can check out my website, like I said before, at danielpoppy.com. You can check out my blog there. I present different pieces of art. Right now I'm talking about art on my blog. I'm looking at different pieces. I think that people don't take in art as much as other types of things, such as movies, such as music. And I want people to see what art is. I want people to connect to art. I think art is important in people's lives. I think it changes I think it's a qualitative thing. Like you may say, well, that art isn't worth anything. But if it's in your life, it's worth more than if it's not. It enhances the experience of your life, right? I'm not going to go through that, why I think that is the case, but I do have a reason for that. But I'm going to be going toward music and indie authors. I really want to focus on people who aren't as big. Art is a little different because there's a lot of artists people don't know, but I want to focus on indie music and indie authors and just expand my own, what I see and who I come in contact with in those areas. Also on my website, you can check out my book. I should be having the supplement to that first book out very soon. I was hoping to have it out a lot sooner. It just didn't work out that way. Things don't work out as you plan. And if you like my podcast, the biggest thing for this podcast that you can do, if you want to support me, you don't have to give me any money. You do not have to tell all your friends. What you can do is you can go on iTunes. if you enjoy the podcast, and write me a review. It's gold, honestly. It'd be phenomenal. So go on iTunes, go on Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, and be like, okay, I'm just going to quick write a review if you enjoy the podcast. Even if you just like it moderately and you're like, hey, 3 stars, I'll give you the pros and cons of what you do. You're like, Dan rants too much. I wish he didn't rant as much. But yeah, if you'd like to support me, please do that. Also, if you want to support me more, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website. As always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.